Thank you, Jennifer. I really appreciate you and your friendship with your family and Dano and the kids. It's awesome. Thank you so much. Greg, thank you for the invitation to be here, to fly all the way across the country. Yes. To be on East Coast time, to get up at 4 a.m. Thank you. As at the beginning of the quarter, I appreciate that. You know, the student body, you have a wonderful student body, a wonderful university. This is a great place. And so it's always a pleasure to be here. It's my second time at Gordon and my second time in the Boston region. Is that right to say? Boston? Okay. Educate me, right? Educate me. So I'm so glad to be here, and you have a wonderful president, administration, and it was fun hanging out with students last night. If you're here, say something, do something if you were there last night. Yeah. That was a lot of fun. We had a little teach-in, and we got busy last night on the intellectual level, right, and the heart level. So, well, let's see if we can do this, okay? I want to talk a little bit about today some of the issues of unity and reconciliation. And I want to start today with this text that I put up on the screen from John 17, verse 20 through 23. And this is part of Jesus' high priestly prayer. And this prayer is, for me, a model of not just Christian engagement with Christians, but actually a better model for me. And from what we've kind of built some of our work around reconciliation in, this text is that, because it speaks of a particular unity, and that's what we want to get at today. I want to talk to you about unity. And so we'll come back to this text. I'm sure many of you know this text very well. Though I wonder sometimes how many sermons I actually have heard about this priestly prayer as it relates to unity. There are other kind of aspects of Jesus' priestly prayer before he is crucified that I think we tend to emphasize rather than this kind of ethereal, ambiguous, I in you, you in me, and them in us thing. And then to say, and this is how the world will know me, right? This is how the world will know me, is through your unity, through our unity. Well, now, we don't have time for that, right? We have a to-do list in an inbox, and we have cards to fill out to say that you attended church, and we have Sunday school lessons to teach, but this idea of actually practicing unity, not just within, but without the body, becomes an issue of the church as it relates to the marketplace. And so let's get into it, shall we? Well, hopefully by the time we're done today, you will believe these things on the screen. You'll just be bought in, no doubt about it. You're kind of going to tattoo this to your notebooks and put it up on your refrigerator, and you'll say, wow, that dude did a really good job. That's my goal. So here they are. We cannot interpret another's context before fully understanding our own. Unity is not transactional, but an expression of mutuality of persons. Unity is not an exchange, but an embrace. Unity is a social ethic and an act of solidarity. Unity is not assimilation of perspectives, not an assimilation of perspectives, but a binding of persons. Okay? That's the syllabi for today. That's the syllabus for today. Those are learning goals. Okay? That's the learning goals. Now, if I go into preacher mode, you just look at me funny, say amen, and I'll go back to professor mode. Is that okay? All right. Okay. That is my wife. I know. Can you believe it? Right? No, really. I go places and people go, wow. It's so awesome. That's why my eyes are closed. It's because, this is a dream. This is a dream. Somebody pinch me. Okay, we went to Disneyland recently over the Christmas break, and so those are 3 out of the 4. My son stayed home. He's 17, hanging out with the family at Disneyland, whatever, Dad. Right? So he came along. He didn't come along, but that's us at Disneyland. That's after like being there 10 hours. We did the marathon version, right? So we were there for 10 hours. Nobody could barely smile. It was, woof. That's like midnight. The place is closing. So, okay. And this is my dad and mom and the grandkids at Christmas. And I don't know if you can see that too well because it's kind of blurry, but the white people are on the right side. That's my mom. She's on the far right side. And then the tall guy, that's my son. God has a sense of humor. I always wanted to be 6'3". It didn't work out for me. It worked out for my son. I don't know how, but God has a sense of humor. Okay. And those are the grandkids. And then my daughter, she's got the bow on her forehead. She forgot she put the bow on her forehead at the beginning of the day. It stayed on through pictures. We thought that's what she wanted. Yeah, it was Christmas, so we kind of went with it. And as you see, the two little grandkids, my daughter and her cousin, they're holding money because Granddad gives dollars per your age. What is that? Somebody got bass? Is that me? Did I do that? Okay, great. And so they give dollars per age, so they're flashing their wad of ones. But since seeing their eights, it's only $8, right? 8 and 6. So there's not a lot of money there. But for some reason, I don't know. Okay. Yeah. Okay, and then we decided this Christmas to do a Seattle family reunion. So this is like the West Coast, well, this is the Pacific Northwest version of our family. We kind of rented out a little hotel room, and then we all got together, and that's us. I mean, we're growing, right? We got grandkids, and so my aunts and uncles are all there. We're missing a few people, but they're all there, and that was really cool. I mean, when's the last time you had a family reunion at Christmas? Yeah, see? That's what I said. But my family's weird like that. And it was at this family reunion, actually, at this gathering this past Christmas, where my uncle, who's kind of the oldest of the relatives here, and he started his comments by saying, I don't know if many of you know, but your great-great-grandfather, his great-grandfather was white. He was the slave owner. And you could just, like, my kids were like, no! Right? That explains so much, because we've got two that are very light and one that's not so light, and it was just, so my son's like, this explains everything, right? And so that was something we even had to process right there. It's like, well, we kind of knew some of the story because the book about us was written in 1998, and it's about the Hairston family as one of the largest slave families in American history by a noted historian. This actually, I found out about this in 1998 when it came out, and one day as I was leading the Perkins Center, this is 2003, 2004, I got a call from some folks at Eastern Mennonite, and the guy with his kind of Appalachian accent, he goes, hi, I'm from the white side of the Will Hairston, of the Hairston family. My name's Will Hairston. And I can't do an Appalachian accent, but he did it so well I could barely understand him. And I said, oh, I heard about you guys. And he goes, yeah, we're real. And so I spent the next few years at Eastern Mennonite Center for Justice and Peace Building, working on a bunch of projects related to what became a national model for engagement on these issues called Coming to the Table. It's now a national project. But that's how I came into the work as early on as a child, understanding that there was something about my story. So when John Perkins comes along, it's an affirmation of what I kind of knew God was doing in my life. Well, today, as I said, that's a few comments about my call, but I want to get at this idea of unity. And, the reality is, friends, unity is not exciting anymore. It's not trending. You don't find a lot of hashtag unity. That's not a surprise to you, right? You get that. It is often difficult to speak of unity in a world polarized on every side. Politics, polarizing. Sexuality, polarizing. Religion, polarizing. Race and ethnicity, polarizing. Class, polarizing. My goodness, sports, polarizing. I'm from Seattle, right? Go Seahawks! Yeah, see, sports, polarizing. But I did see a picture of Russell Wilson at your airport, and I was going to take a picture, and anyway. For one to speak of unity as if it were a relevant conversation seems futile in the culture today. Does it not seem somewhat whimsical, fluffy, dreamy, maybe even utopian and somewhat out of reach? Maybe impossible, maybe even sometimes just darn right pure fantasy. Well, my goal today is in some ways simple. It is to rethink unity. In other ways, my task today is extremely difficult. Difficult because, well, I doubt we have much experience anymore in our culture today with biblical unity and its supporting cast of characters, namely reconciliation. In my work with reconciliation, I began to research what I call frameworks and filters. These frameworks and filters are observed by examining a community's stories as a set of data points. When I was here in August, I worked with about 160 students. We worked through a set of frameworks and filters based on how they understood their own story. I don't have time to break down the particular data of that time and share what students observed about themselves and or this community, but I will say this about what our research is revealing. Talking about unity in our culture is difficult because our brains simply do not have a deep and landmark type of memory storage. We don't have much in us around unity, or reconciliation for that matter. At least nothing we can easily recall. Accordingly, our culture has more words for individualism and its supporting structures and polarities than does unity and reconciliation. Furthermore, and even more importantly, different contexts often produce an apparatus or framework from which our filters or lenses are constructed. For instance, in the 4th grade, I was traumatized by an older man while waiting for the school bus. He threatened us with words such as, "Go home. You don't belong here." No matter what I thought about neighborhood and race prior to that, which I have no substantive memory of, whatever I thought prior to that, it is this I recall as an incident, a traumatic incident that forms my understanding of race and place. Mind you, that is an experience which I had no choice about. The work of reconciliation is in part to acknowledge our story as a framework and filter that can help or hinder our ability to relate to others, and to manage how my personal framework and those for whom carry similar frameworks filter life similarly but also differently than other communities. Reconciliation, then, is the work of interpreting the context or systems that produce our filters, our lenses. For example, in an increasingly diversifying society, we often fail to realize polarization is more familiar than unity conceptually, given that the American story contains more about polarities and disparities than commonalities or notions of unity. For this reason, Leslie Newbegin's book entitled The Gospel in a Pluralist Society is even more instructive than it was when it was published in 1989. Now, let's make a few assertions, if you will. You can research these points on your own, but for the sake of an efficient argument, allow me to summarize. Whatever the context is of our lives and our diverse stories, number one, context matters. New Begin postulates we are shaped by our context, and we shape the context. It is an iterative process. The systems that influence the context of life then matter to God, who cares deeply for the context and the individual. And then point number 3, if points 1 and 2 hold fast, then we must care and give energy to both the context of people's lives as much as we do the individual. As a point of evidence, educational research correlates highly the relationship between zip code and educational success. Zip code and educational success. We know how well you will do not by your SAT scores. We know how well you do by where you come from. Medical research is showing that we can tell how healthy you are by your zip code. Zip code as a determiner of the environment that you come out of which you then contribute to building. Now, higher education did not create these disparities and inequities, but can Christian higher education afford to simply accept the contextual hand it has been dealt? Can we simply just say, that's the way it is? Now, herein lies the paradoxical challenge for Christians. Our Western story reveals an awareness of a personal relational orientation with limited awareness or capacity for the social communal. Thusly, we have kind of a social ethic of Christian community that is not only difficult to conceptualize, but operationalizing it and instantiating it in terms of practices of unity within communities are typically lightweight, kind of diet level. Whenever we talk about unity, it is somewhat kind of hand-holding, kumbaya-ish. Let's hug. That's the extent. Let's get together and sing a few songs, but then go to our separate zip codes. Go to our separate tribes. Not only are they typically lightweight, but I argue because they are not systemic and lack some systemic influence, they typically are conflict avoidant and hardly missional. The practices we do set up are oftentimes hardly missional, lightweight, conflict avoidant, and they give into a sort of binary model that's often dysfunctional and many times irrelevant for us today in terms of practices of unity. So in our Christian commitment, in our Christian brains, for example, there is a relationship between the problems of the world and the person. You know how this goes. The problem with the world is that person made an individual decision to be in the particular place at the particular time and react to the particular policeman that they did. Ouch. Did he just go there? Yeah. Because we have a personal orientation to how something happens, we think in terms of what the person did individually to get where they are today. So the solution is also personal. Personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Personal devotion to Christ. Personal devotion to each other. See, this is the strategy, the long-term strategy of evangelism, mission, and relief development organizations. In this way, saving all the stranded starfish on the seashore is good because I saved that starfish, and to that starfish, it mattered. You know this story. All the starfish washed up on the shore, and someone asked the individual, why are you throwing each starfish back when you have all these starfish? Well, to the starfish that I threw back, it mattered to that one. That is a very individual way of thinking about the fact that something is happening in the ocean to cause all the starfish to be on the shore. This individual orientation, as the way this story is told, fits our way of thinking about evangelism, mission, and relief. Linear and non-communal. This is what the Gospel and Pluralist Society refers to as a dualism, which arises out of our individualism in our culture and from the resultant privatization of our ethical thinking. Yeah, this is tough stuff. In a small group with two of my friends, one of them African American, the other white, they recently told the story 3 days ago, about how their personal relationship has been so transformative to each other. Then I asked them, one wealthy, one not, I asked them what would have happened if the wealthy gentleman did not have to go to Bible study every day in one of the most diverse neighborhoods in Seattle. Would you have experienced this great transformational relationship? To which he said, no, probably not. Because by having to go every day, every Wednesday, to a Bible study in a community that looks nothing like mine, I was not simply transformed by my individual relationship with this person, but I was transformed by the context of the Rainier Valley, which is only as less diverse as Brooklyn, New York. It is not that the individual personal orientation does not matter. It matters profoundly. But it alone by itself, on its own, does not empower us to engage the context and prevailing ideas within that context, the systems at work. It is limited. It limits our capacity to practice unity and reconciliation. Herein lies what students of reconciliation often refer to as the trivialization and commodification of reconciliation. It's simply just a marketing strategy because it has no weightiness without unity, and you cannot have unity with simply a personal relational orientation to the world. Now, I don't want to go down that road too much. It'll even get more quiet than it already is. But if unity is limited to individual, personal, relational orientation, will we be ever able to reach a corporate unity that reflects Jesus' priestly prayer? Jesus says, I in you in me, and us in them. And does that prayer have any place in an individual, personal orientation of our culture? And can the individual, personal, relational orientation of the world in a global world of global corporations and global networks truly allow the church to be the example, the impact, the influence in the world? Can it influence national conversations? Can it influence national identities, global networks? If our only orientation to the world is personal relational. So given you hopefully suspended some of your plausibility structures when I started, kind of like that romantic movie where the couple only has one problem, but they have this wonderful relationship, right? Those are the best kind of romantic movies. You only have one problem to deal with. Every married couple knows you've got like 100 you're juggling at one time. Or that action adventure movie where the guy makes it across the desert with no camel, no water, and no place to sleep. We suspend some of our plausibility structures to enjoy a good movie. Well, I hope you can hold just a few more. You can suspend just a little bit longer some of your plausibility structures so I can go a little bit deeper. And now I want to make some really strident comments about unity. I brought these up before, but I want to kind of break each one down. What does a holistic view of unity, and reconciliation look like? Well, we cannot interpret then another's context before we fully understand our own. See, the work is first personal. To understand my own context. What are the forces that have given me the story that I have? Interpreting cultural context of prevailing trends with the full awareness of how the principalities and powers of our world have sought to undermine or empower, abuse or prefer, subvert or promote, empower or disempower me and those from my community or from my tribe or from my village is the work of reconcilers. That's the work of bridge builders. To first understand where I am and what context have formed my opinions, my perspectives. God calls the church to do this. God calls the church to discern the context and inquire of God how it should incarnate itself, how it should embody itself and embrace the culture or to prophesy to it, to speak to it. That's the first step of unity, is that we engage an examination of the stories that have made us us. And to do so fully aware that someone else's context may be producing another story. Now you would think, as a people who come to the text with the four Gospels, would understand that. See, avoidance is not a Christ-like social ethic. And it doesn't lead to a transformation. It doesn't lead to transformational unity, as Jesus prays. Furthermore, attempting kind of to interpret our own personal, relational, and socio kind of cultural context informs us directly and indirectly as to the principles and practices of cross-cultural and cross-contextual engagement. You want to know how to make sure you don't ask a dumb question when you're in another country? I do this with students all the time, right? I ask them, have you asked yourself that question of your own culture and your own community? Are you self-aware? Because that will teach you how to engage the other. And thus, we move closer to forms of unity that have substance, that are weighty. I ask again then, what does a holistic view of unity and reconciliation look like? Well, it becomes transactional. It's transactional when we leave it at the level of personal social, a personal relational. Instead, though, unity is not transactional, but is an expression of mutuality. This is also the work of reconciliation. Mutuality, that there is a reciprocal mutuality. We then benefit from each other's relationship. We are not exchanging ideas and perspectives as much as we are embracing each other. This is the challenge for us. The story of Ruth and Naomi is not a story of transaction. The story of Ruth and Naomi are of two people from different ethnic and cultural communities binding themselves together. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of examples in our culture of this kind of binding together. John Perkins' story is what it is because that's what he did. There's a binding together that we can experience, that we are led to experience as a more weightier form of unity, a more transformational form of unity. My friends who I told you about, who did their work together in our city and who are part of my small group, they decided to go to Mississippi together and to walk through the streets of Mississippi, of a small town in Mississippi. They then went and met the chief of police the next day, and the chief of police said, "I heard you were in town." And they said, "How did you know we were in town?" He said, "One, it's a small town, it's Mississippi." But then he said, "A black and a white man walking down the street in my town, we're going to know about it. Because 10 years ago, this would have been a problem. 20 years ago, it wouldn't have happened. 30 years ago, you wouldn't be here." They're walking down this road of a small town in Mississippi. Wasn't just about them. It transformed the neighborhood, the community. It was transformative. That act of unity, that act of embrace becomes transformative to the community around them. And so I ask you, what is God leading you to do? To walk down a street, to walk down a hallway, to engage in your neighborhood, in your context, relationally, that is transformative at the social communal level? Or is what you're doing and practicing, affirming that we actually don't have any idea what substantive unity is about? This is a prophetic kind of instantiation of Jesus' high priestly prayer, that we are called to engage this way. In this way, we are all reconcilers. We are all reconcilers. We are all called to live in that way. Well, transactional means an exchange of goods and services, but unity in Scripture is profoundly mutual, occurring at the level of one's being or ontology. Unity in Scripture is mutual, similar to what Miroslav Volf calls an embrace. There is a big difference between someone exchanging information, exchanging goods and services, and someone exchanging a hug. One colleague of mine asked the question, "Who have you hugged today?" of his class. The class looked up and said, "Excuse me?" He goes, "Yes. Who have you embraced in the marketplace that would simply be transformative to the marketplace?" What is necessary is for us to believe that the other's context has provided enough information for them to be where they are. My context has provided enough information for me to be where I am, but that's not the limits of our engagement. We must understand how we can interact across the contexts that have created our very disparate stories, and thus live out this kind of transformational unity. So when we go back to our context, we go back differently than we did when we began. What becomes of unity and reconciliation? In Scripture, unity is not only a social ethic, it's an act of solidarity. Unfortunately, our culture lacks gratuitous examples of this. Unfortunately, the rhetoric of, let's say, Black Lives Matters follows with another rhetoric of all lives matter, which evidences our abundant words for polarization, but not many words for unity. But if unity is solidarity, unity does not then, and does not require a litmus test for intellectual agreement. Because unity is not an assimilation of perspectives. Unity is a binding of persons. And if we do not agree on who the life it is that matters, we can at least agree
to be bound together in the struggle to figure it out? What if we could be so convinced to live out a substantive unity that no matter how we perceive things differently, we refuse to be divided in our perspective? What if our unity was so weighty in the church that it transformed the world? What if our unity was so weighty and so heavy and so substantive that it transformed how we did higher education? What if our unity was so heavy that enemies became strangers, strangers became servants, servants became friends, and friends could become family? What if our unity was so provocative that it caused people to believe that there was a Jesus or is a Jesus simply because of the way we are unified across all of our differences, diversities, and polarities? What if our unity was so provocative that it transformed systems that sought to divide, where zip codes no longer mattered? What if our unity was so weighty that it became the sermon that we had to preach every Sunday? It became our prayer as it was Jesus' prayer. What if unity was so substantive that we had to rethink how we self-identify over against another, because simply it's not good enough to identify myself in competition with another? I must keep seeking unity until enemies become strangers, strangers become servants, servants become friends, and friends become family. God bless you. Thank you so much.